Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pando Horizons on our second wonderful day. Today, I have the great pleasure of hosting a conversation between these three individuals and myself. And the topic for today is getting and keeping, in parentheses, a seat at the table, influencing the business agenda. So, to talk about this topic today, I have these people, and I will introduce them very briefly before we jump in. Camille John, who is down here, who is at LMAC Leadership and a special advisor to the CEO of British Airways as part of his responsibilities. I have Dena Singleton, Chief People Officer at Kajabi, over there. And then I have Kaylee Davies, Director of People and Talent at Lawhive. Welcome to our conversation today. And I'm going to kick us off with the following question, which is a little bit tongue in cheek. And the question goes like this: when it comes to seats at the table, what tables and what seats should we actually be trying to get? And I know that that has a little bit of spice to it. And I invite you to answer as playfully as you wish and feel comfortable. But this is something obviously in HR and people practices we've been talking about for decades. I'm curious where we are today in the profession and what kind of seats and what kind of tables should we really be aspiring to? That's the first question we'll start out with, and I'll have everybody answer. So maybe Dena, you first.
Thanks a lot, Mark, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak at Panda Horizons. It's a pleasure to be here. When I think about like what tables, what seats, I kind of frame it up into like where do I want to spend my time, my energy. When I was early career, I definitely wanted to. I was like Aaron Burr, and I wanted to be in the room where it happened, and so didn't know what that room was. I just knew that that was the room that I wanted to be in. Now that I've been around for a while, I want to be in rooms that and in conversations where I think it is directly relevant to me, either learning critical things about the business that will help me see around corners so that I can like shape my HR agenda around that, or two, things that I think are interesting so that I can look down into the future and kind of think about the trends either for my business or for other businesses so that I can think about like how do we stay on the cutting edge of HR, or three, rooms where people are interesting to have conversations with. So it's not every room; it is the right rooms for where my company is or where I am personally, because I think those are the rooms that drive the most interest for me.
Great. So selective about where those rooms are, particularly because we don't have time. We don't have time
Right.
to be at every table and in every room where there's a table, metaphorically. Camille, how about you?
Yeah, I think thank you so much once again. I echo Dina, and thank you for having me and join you today here. It is an absolute pleasure. Following off from that, I think it's an interesting one because I think you need to place yourself in rooms that are going to add, tangible value and value to the future. Thinking around, if you look at an organization, there are so many different rooms, and quite rightly, the different rooms because it is different, arms of the organization. For myself, I think coming up through the grassroots level of an organization, it was important for me as to what will I be able to take back? Where will I give back? Sometimes the trajectory is not always I want to go to that room that's up there. Quite often it's I need to go to a room that's right next door because that's
Mm,
going to add much more value to the very people that I'm surrounded with. There's a large disconnect quite often I think that people have where they think that there's only one room and one table with a few seats and it's up there and that's not the case. There are so many other areas where there's influence, particularly if you think about at grassroots level, the distance between grassroots level and that big table that people seem to have in their mind is so vast that nothing would ever really take place and get done. So it's really important to re-acclimatize the narrative. What is that narrative of what a table looks like? And I think that's what the future of it should be.
that's great. And Kaylee, you before we expand on this a little bit.
Yeah, well, imagine if I didn't now say thank you for having me and how grateful I was to be here after this. I am, of course,
You've been yanked and pulled, complaining and protesting the whole way into this. That would be a great intro.
exactly. No, thank you. I think for me, it means being in a room where the table is almost agnostic, right? The seat at the table is almost agnostic, and talking about revenue growth, product expansion, or market entry, and we're then taking that away to execute on our seat. Although that means now that the seat isn't at the table, the seat's outside the room. So I've just ruined the analogy, and I apologize. But I think it's because often people think that you come to that table with your people seat and you're bringing your thing, right? You're bringing your culture deck or your employee surveys, and you're kind of imposing that then on the table. Actually, I see it more as that agnostic piece where, yeah, you're learning as much as you can about the business and what it needs, and then you're taking that away to figure out how you go and execute that from your own professional lens. And for us, then that's the people side of things. If we're not kind of shaping then how we get there, how the team grows, how it performs, and the changes along the way, then we're just kind of brought in as the cleanup crew, which I think is what a lot of HR professionals feel otherwise, is that all the big conversations about revenue that they think we don't understand happens up there. They come out, dictate to us, and then we have to play cleanup because we've not been included along the way. So yeah, I think it's that I don't want the people seat at the HR table. I want there to be like a people lens across the whole thing.
That's fantastic. And maybe expanding on what all three of you just said. I mean, obviously the traditional table and traditional seat is the highest level of business decision making in an organization. And it is true historically that in many cases HR leadership hasn't been included into that conversation. If we do get into that room and are sitting at that table, how should we show up, and what's important about that role, and how can we help the organization being at that table, given what we're charged with? Anybody can answer that one.
I'll chime in. I think it's really about tailoring your message and speaking the different languages. And the language that you speak first probably shouldn't be people when you're actually looking for that seat at the table and coming to that. You need to be speaking, I don't know, P&L first and product second, and then people third. And you need to be tailoring your messaging. So to the CTO, that might be about productivity, to the COO, that might be about process, to the CFO, that might be kind of cost, risk, time to effectiveness, and learning how to speak that language so that you're not coming in with something that feels amorphous to them in an employee, NPS score, and there being a so what at the end of your, okay, well, it's 7 out of 10. So what, right? Okay, let me start with something else and explain why we need to care about what the ENPS score is or what it means. Maybe we don't care, actually. Maybe the agenda item is that we don't care. We have other things to focus on because it's not the most impactful thing for the business and the mission. So I think it's showing up, showing that you can speak other languages than HR.
I think that's super interesting, and maybe we can get other panelists to comment too. It's when you arrive at that table, your role then isn't to represent HR. Your role is to be a general business leader, and I think that's very important. And maybe we can, Dena, I saw you start thinking about this, so go ahead.
Because I love what Kaylee's done, like a great, I love what Kaylee said. And I want to talk about the path to the table. So I spend a majority of my time actually with my biggest partners who are legal, accounting, and finance. And it used to be the head of engineering, but I spend my time with them because before I get into the room to have conversations about other things, I'm spending time with accounting and finance to understand where are we at with the business and how are my people metrics laddering up to some of the business metrics, so that when we're in the room having the conversation about whether it's product or whether it's where engineering strategy is, I've already kind of like synced in some of these other people metrics, and we've already kind of have like a story or a narrative coming into the room, because by the time you're actually like sitting in the room, it's too late to like pull your story together. And so I love what Kelly's saying about being a business partner. And for me, the partnership starts like, 3 rooms down the hall with
Right.
My friends that are in the other
Where
areas.
the real stuff happens.
Yeah.
where the work happens, where the work gets done.
Camille, do you have anything to add on this?
I think well it echoes, especially particularly what Kaylee was saying around, that language. I think there's always this assumption that when you do get to this table that you're going to be coming in there guns blazing, speaking about, a very foreign topic or a topic that perhaps they have sort of, heard of many times before. So I think it's the preparation is key. And I always go into these meetings thinking, what is in it for them? This
Mm,
is it's really, really about looking at, it's it's often a conflicting or provocative conversation, but it is like a business sell. What is it? If I'm speaking to someone in a C-suite team, these people are there to think about the progression of the business, the wider business. They have about 10 different things that are extremely important, where quite often, particular areas of the business, there's one thing that's a bit of a heavy focus. So it's bridging that gap and knowing that if I'm coming in to have a conversation, particularly around leadership, because I'm very passionate about investing in your level one, two, three, every level of leadership in a business. And how do you now pitch this where everything we're discussing today is now going to have an impact on a wider business, and how is it going to affect you and your mandate? So it's very, very important, I think, to have that abstract mindset when you're going in at this table, which I'm still looking to find what this table looks like, by the way. But this table.
The table. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's definitely what how I view it.
Because and this follows a lot of what all of you were saying. If my only function as a people leader is to come in, sit in the room about the business, and talk about HR metrics,
Mhm.
that's that's not that's not really valuable in that room. There's all
Mhm.
sorts of other ways they can consume HR metrics. My value then becomes, am I part of leading this business as a business holistically? How can I then contribute to the shaping of that? And that's I mean, most C-suite executives aren't there to advocate for their piece of the business. They're taking what they know about their piece of business and giving direction about where the business strategy evolves. So I think that's a very important framing that all three of you are touching on. Um, what are some of the experiences you've all had that you'd be comfortable sharing with the group around your journey through the various rooms, through the various tables, to arrive at the most senior table, and maybe frame it from a perspective of, we're probably talking to a bunch of people who aren't quite at that level as this group, and giving them some retrospective on your own journey and the ups and downs and lessons you learned along the way. Anybody care to be vulnerable and start on that one?
I can try.
Go
I
for
can
it.
try. I think my journey, and again, I think you're right about our audience and people thinking about like what the route is to this mysterious room and this magical table. The thing that worked for me and built a lot of trust and credibility was delivery, right? Being results oriented, delivering. There comes a point in your career where maybe you're shipping really well and you're thinking, I want to be more strategic. I want to be more strategic, and you do. It's actually quite hard to make that tangible and what that means. And I encourage people to not get too distracted along the way of trying to be too philosophical when they're thinking about being strategic. And actually, I think a lot of that trust and that access to the table is earned in the trenches. So kind of showing up, just really getting it. I was going to use another word then, but I'll be PG-13. Getting it done, and that earning you the permission then to be strategic, because you can show that you understand how it works, and you can speak from a point of experience that, like, hey, we did it this way before. I think we could get better results this way. And that's one of the steps closer to that table where then you build that trust with the leaders and they think, okay, maybe if they had a little bit more context when they ship the next time, when they deliver the next time, they can get even better. So it's about, yeah, kind of coming through that. I think the vulnerable piece is, don't expect that table to be gold gilded when you get there. We were kind of joking backstage and saying, to kind of, coaching people in our team where they're really focused on that strategic and the seat at the table, and just, it's not necessarily going to be what you think it is. That we don't have all the answers when you do get the seats at the table. Everyone is kind of doing their doing their level best to make it work as well. But it's not a means to an end. You don't get there and wave a magic wand and suddenly have all the answers. Like, you're still scratching your head and trying to figure it out, and still shipping and delivering a lot of the time too. That delivery might look a little bit different, but that will probably continue to be, at least in the startup and in the scale up world where I live, that will continue to be your route to credibility and trust.
I'll give a piece of advice that is that it's easier for me to give now than it was for me to hear and understand when I was earlier in my career. And it is around really holding on to your mentors and leveraging your mentors and people that are a level or two above you on your path to whatever that behind that golden door. And the reason I say that is because when you're in like early career, mid career, you will make mistakes. You're going to fall down and you're going to bruise your knees. You're going to have to get back up and like brush them off. And these mistakes are sometimes painful. For me, these mistakes were painful. And so you want to always show up like in your very best self to your mentors. And so sometimes what you will find is that what I found is that I did not leverage my mentors through the pain and through the embarrassing pieces, but only through the good pieces of my career. And so you're calling up to say, oh, I got this promotion or I did this great project, but not calling up to say, I didn't do as well as I thought I wanted to do on this project or for this thing. And the reason that that's so critical on the path is because your mentors are deeply invested in you. And they will arrive there before you, and they will have advice that will carry you through your career. And so carry on with these relationships, both through the upsides and the downsides. And so, because once you like get into the door and you're sitting at the table, guess what's still going to happen? The exact same challenges that happened the year before, 5 years before, but now the stakes are even higher. And so you've got to have this group of trusted advisors who you're willing to share like the most challenging things that will happen to you on a day-to-day basis, because you're going to be challenged every day once you're in that room.
It's great advice.
Yeah.
Camille, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I think, we must never underestimate the importance of relationship building. I think, in my earlier years in my career, I didn't think, oh, okay, I'm envisioning to get there to work close with the CEO of this airline. I was very much focused on understanding the importance of connecting to people, and that when you see people and you start to understand what really matters to them, as you move in your career, you're able to take that with you. So you speak from a position of knowledge, you speak from a position of being able to understand how the messages you deliver in a people role land in different spaces in the business, and managing that time effectively, where exactly what Kaylee said quite rightly is delivering on results, so balancing that, don't being so focused on just one thing, maybe making that absolute balance where you are able to connect to people, understand what you're bringing. So your mentors are there for a reason. Your mentors are there to support and guide, leverage them. Exactly what Dena said as well. It's not just about the great conversations. It's understanding, looking in the mirror and thinking, what do I need to improve? What relationship do I now need to build? So I can now get to that. I may not know everything about finance, but I may now need to perhaps leverage new friendships in finance to have a bit of an understanding of the lingo and the language. So when I'm speaking to someone in that department or that team, they don't see me as someone who's, from Mars. It's
Right.
understanding how to create and leverage those relationships. I think relationship building is, at least from my perspective, when I'm in these rooms and thinking, it matters so much.
I'll add a couple things just from my own journey. And one thing that it expands on what you said, Kaylee, about delivering, and it's also about knowledge. So the more I know about everything happening in the organization, even areas outside my domain, the more I can bring information to the next level. And so there's a width as well as a depth question when it comes to my value. And the more broadly I inform myself about what's going on in the business, no matter where I'm sitting, the more helpful I can be. Like the greater the contribution I can make. I learned that, I think, relatively early, and I was lucky to learn it. The other thing I didn't learn early, but I certainly learned, was there's always another table, and there's always a table above the table. So especially in certain kinds of industries, it's Well, there's the executive table, then there's the board table, and then there's the tables at the board partners. It just keeps going up and up and up. And you can get into mental games with yourself about, well, now I can really influence. And oh, hold on, maybe I can't. Now I can really influence. Oh, hold on. And so focusing on delivering and having enough contribution where I'm at today, back to what you said, like, is really, really important, because it keeps you from sort of continually being unsatisfied with your contribution. Because if only I were in the next room where decisions are really made. Well, the reality is decisions are being made right in front of you. Can you influence them in the right ways? And if you can, you're helping the business. So that's my own learnings from my own journey. I want to change a little bit to a different topic. I mean, it's obviously related to our topic, but I'll shift a little bit. And the question is this: we've talked about influence and relationship. One thing that I think is increasingly important in how we influence is the use of information and data in particular. So if influencing as a people or HR professional, the quote unquote table 10 years ago was about certain things, what are the elements of influence today? And then maybe if you're willing to speculate, what do you think the elements of influence over the next few years are going to be in the people profession? Maybe start with Camille this time.
Oh, I'm still thinking about this one because that is such a great question. Because I think over the past 15, if I look at the past 20 years, I'll even go 20 years, we have seen such it's like lightning speed movement and growth in influencing, from data to common data. Now we're talking about AI and everything else that will be coming after that. And I think it's around keeping a close eye on what is really trending, what's trending within your business, what's trending in your industry, but particularly what's trending outside of your industry. Because what we are seeing now is an integration of industries coming together to create new ways and nuances. So I think that is where, especially from an aviation, if I think about aviation, I joined the aviation world. I come from that background. I've been in aviation for 28 years. So for me, I have seen what we see now is completely different language and topic of what was influencing our business and key decisions globally that I think would probably make people stand up and turn around their graves right now if they saw this, but equally
Right.
be jumping up to join it again. So I think that's where I think it's extracting, that data, historic data, but know how we are now going to use this data we've currently had to get us to where we are, and how relevant is it currently, and how are we now going to go forward, particularly from a legacy carrier, where I think that's the shift. We now need to move away from identifying ourselves as a legacy carrier. I come
Right.
from a time where it was almost a rite of passage to say, you've been here for 80 years, 90 years, 100 years. Well, the current 22-year-old entrepreneur is not interested to be flew a Concorde jet 23 years ago. Yeah,
Right.
so it's how do we step up, and that's where I think I'll hand over to Dena and Kaylee because I'm sure they want to come in on that as well.
Yeah.
Dina?
I love your comment about extraction. I think that it's about being curious, being bold, and being wise. And so I don't have a particular bit of data, but I know how you should process data. So when I think about AI, everyone's talking about AI right now,
Right.
and
We're going to have to talk. It was going to come
we'll
up
talk
here
about it later
eventually.
too. and what really strikes me, the conversation for me at my company right now is like, what about my job and the impact of it in AI? And but what that really throws me back to is because I've studied HR and how people work, is that jobs change all the time. And so if you want to have this continual seat at the table, you got to be curious and understand what is happening in the world around you, but not just what's happening in the next year, but what is going to happen 5 years out, 10 years out, and then what is the impact of it in your work today? How do you start to prepare yourself, or prepare your employees for the thing that's happening around the corner? Which means that you also have to be bold in some of the statements that you're going to make, and some of the leaps that you're asking the organization or the people to have with you. I worked someplace and we were behind the trend when it came to thinking about advertising on the internet, because we thought that the real thing was search, but the real thing was actually advertising and charging people for ad rates. But if you had said that, you'd have been crazy, but that's really kind of bold. And you also have to be wise, because sometimes you're going to make some of these statements and some may be wrong and some may be right. And so you kind of have to be thoughtful in like how you're trying to interpret these trends, think about like what steps you're going to make, and then what risks you're going to take. So I think it's being willing to be out there on the limb and think about the injection of all of these things into your business.
Yeah, yeah. Kaylee, any thoughts about what information
Ooh.
and what data we bring to the table and how that's going to evolve?
Yeah, it's a great question. And both Camille and Dena have already touched on some really interesting points. And I think it really just speaks to the way that HR has evolved like so dramatically over the years. And, I think about back when it was personnel and everything was very administrative and the data that we would have used for our roles at that point. And then I think we moved into our fluffy era where everything was people first, but maybe losing sight of some of the other stuff that was required and being too woolly and the data that comes with that. And, I've already joked a little bit about EMPS scores. No shade to EMPS scores. I think they have their place, but that kind of data then really took off. A lot of that trying to quantify qualitative data in a way. And I think the direction of travel is being way more results driven, like way more results driven, and understanding what that means for the business, not HR results, like what are the business results that we can impact. And I won't repeat myself about, speaking that language again, but I really liked what Camille was saying about learning from other industries. I think learning from other roles is really valuable too. If you work in a startup and you're in the people space, go ask your finance director or your CFO to kind of walk you through the model. They've probably never been asked that before. They'll probably bite your arm off, take them to lunch, ask them about unit economics. You'll learn so much, and they'll be happy to tell you about it, I'm sure. And I think that is that's the direction of travel again, of using results that you might not have thought about, using data that you might not have thought about being applicable because it's not quite in your swim lane. I don't think we're going to have swim lanes much longer in the people space. And I think AI will be, I won't dive into AI yet because I'm sure it's coming. But yeah, I think that's the next thing to kind of be looking around the corner on, like Dena said.
Following this thread a little bit, and some of you have already touched on this, when we are in that room, we often are asked to represent or own on behalf of the organization things like employee engagement, things like leadership quality. And I'm torn a little bit, having done that job, the chief people officer job for about a decade. There are times when I don't see anybody else necessarily shouldering that, and so like somebody's gotta be the moral compass on these things. But obviously, I wish I weren't the only moral compass on it. I think that's a really interesting tension for a lot of HR professionals who are at the table. How do we ensure that the organization takes these things seriously? I was almost going to say cares about them, but something you said earlier, Kaylee, I think is provocative. It's like maybe they don't care about it right now. I mean, is it our job to make them care? And I mean, no. I mean, but if the organization wants to be an organization that has like high retention, attracts and retains talent, like it's almost the consequentialist part of it. It's like if you want all these things in a good culture, well, then you have to pay attention to these things. But how do we both own that to a certain extent? Because obviously, ultimately, the P&L is owned by our colleague, the CFO. Like everybody owns their piece. How do we both own these things that are about culture, but also ensure that everybody else carries a load? If that question makes sense. So happy to have anybody comment on that one.
I think for myself on this one, that's actually a very I think it's something that is very common that happens to many people. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Mark, because it does happen. I think at many different tables around the world. And this is where from my own experience, it's knowing that these are calling in moments when you are speaking with people, when you are sharing information, when you're carrying this load quite often, when you're in the people team and the HR team, and rather than calling out, because people can often feel that when you bring up people, or perhaps, why are we not doing this? Or have you thought about this? It can often be met with such resistance as if they're being called out. So I think it's around calling in moments and getting people to understand the benefit of looking at the lens in a different way. And I don't know any C-suite leader or any major decision maker in any business that doesn't want to do better. Because we get to these
do better in
levels.
any way. Like, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
We
So
need
we
to
always
win.
do better. Yeah. You don't get into these roles and think, oh, I'm coming here to lose. Like, you want to
Right.
be better, and in order for you to be better, you have to be vulnerable. But equally for us, we have to approach that conversation from a position of calling in as to, this is an opportunity for you to understand something a bit more. This will benefit you. This will be a bigger thing for you and for all of us. It's a win-win, because right now it could be teetering on a bit of a win-lose. So I think how you broach those conversations. That's been my experience, at least, at these tables, because I completely understand what you're saying, when you about the moral compass, feeling sometimes as you were the only sole person holding that moral compass.
Yeah. Kaylee, you want to talk about this
Yeah.
one? Oh no, Dena, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
No, Kaylee,
Wasn't it-
please.
Yeah. This is a tough one because I think it's something that we all feel. I think there is a large kind of cultural piece to this at the leadership level, and I don't mean that in a woolly way. I think actually this piece needs to be quite explicit of, you talked about it kind of sitting on our shoulders. Is that right? Like, it's we know, the people here know that it is not just on our shoulders, right? It's impossible. If I was
Right.
able to change the direction of a culture, improve a culture by
Yeah, by
myself,
yourself.
whew, like easy peasy. I could log off, go home, it would all be so easy. But they can do it without us as an individual, and we can't do it without them as a collective. So
Right.
the reframing of that as a partnership, I think, is um I mean, that's easier said than done. I'm saying that, like, we all need to take accountability as leaders, and we do. But I appreciate that if you're not coming from that starting point, that can be an uphill battle depending on what your leadership team cares about, what they're focused on at the moment. Again, let's keep on with EMPS scores, but like, if revenue is tanking and there are layoffs on the horizon, like, EMPS score, it is a valuable piece of data. No one in that room is necessarily going to hear you out on that piece. It's the translation of that piece. And maybe you saw MPS dipping and that has, had some relation to productivity or something along those lines. But yeah, I do think it's a challenge that I think a lot of us face, and you have to kind of figure out how to operationalize whose responsibility that is. And maybe that's codified through shared OKRs, depends how your business works. Maybe it needs to come, from the leadership team and the C-suite, making it clear that we're all responsible for that. But I don't think there's a silver bullet answer on that
Yeah.
one, because yeah, we could all just go have a nap if there was, I think.
Dena?
I love hearing both Kaylee and Camille talk about this. This calling in moment is something that is, and I'm a career HR generalist and HR business partner, and I spent some time with some chief diversity officers, and also some time with some community leaders. And I did not understand the impact of the words "a calling in moment," and it really is this way in which you drive inclusion, which may not be naturally, which may not come naturally to HR business partners and people that have grown up in that HR track. And so, what I encourage my fellow HR business partner or people who've grown up through HR to do is spend some time understanding and deeply researching what it means to call people in. Because what I do find is that business leaders are laser focused on like how to grow the business, and they also have some soft hearts and some vulnerability around thinking that, what do you mean that I'm not taking people seriously or taking diversity seriously or some of these metrics that we quote unquote own as HR leaders. And so when we come to the table, we have to figure out, how do we have this conversation in a way that advances the conversation and doesn't alienate people, even if they don't say that they've been alienated. We've got to make sure that we approach it in a way that does not alienate. And it really is a skill that is not taught in school, and that by the time that you learn it, you may have caused some unintentional damage to the business. And so this is a great area for all of us to kind of like dig in and learn more about.
Absolutely. I get worried if a CEO says to me, "You are the moral conscience of our enterprise." It's like I hope you are too. You know,
Yes.
I mean, I can be a moral conscious of the, consciousness of the enterprise, but we all kind of need to take that on, or else this isn't going to be an organization that has clarity of leadership in that regard. So, and I also hope that all of us are taking seriously financial conscience. Like it's almost, you wouldn't just say the only person who cares about whether or not we're going to be on budget is the CFO. It's like we all have to shoulder that burden. So the same is true of culture and values behavior. I think it's very important, to seek that out and call in, as we've been saying. We only have 5 minutes left, so I want to hear from each of you a quick summary point for all the people who are listening around. Hey, I'm on my own journey to get into that room and to be as impactful as I can be. Give me one do and maybe one don't about thinking about my journey in that regard as a way of concluding. Dena, you want to start this off?
Sure, thanks. You are a subject matter expert in HR, so you know you deserve to be in the room. You know that is the path that you're going to be on. Find a partner or an ally, finance, accounting, legal, and and really partner up and get deep in their area so that you can have like a peer area of expertise. You'll never be as great at finance as the finance guy, but be able to understand in that language really well, and that will serve you really well in your future.
Kaylee, how about you next?
I think maybe I'll go back to my point about delivering. I think make sure that you understand how you can maximize your impact to the mission and the goals of the business and focus on delivering that. And I think a lot of that route to the table then kind of happens a little bit more organically, and you can stop. Don't over index on if I'm doing a don't over index on getting to the table, rushing to the table, thinking that it is some magical thing. I do think that if you focus on delivery and credibility and trust, you find yourself there before you know it.
I'll do mine, and then I'll give Camille the chance to close us all out. Mine is just simply don't anchor your self-worth on whether or not you are in that table or in that room or not in that table in that room. There's times when you will be, there's times when you won't be, and kind of following up what Dena said, you're a professional. Some organizations are going to pull you into that room, some organizations might not, but that's as much about them than you, and don't anchor your self-worth on that. But Camille, you get the last words here today, other than thank yous from everybody.
Wow, thank you, thank you. Oh my goodness, pressure. No, no. I think if I think about the don't, I would say the don't is to don't take everything personal. That happens in business. I think we can often allow to be led by emotions that so much times it's no one wakes up one day as a team of leaders and says, today we're going to mess around with so and so, so we learn to remove the personal element from feedback and from misguidance and misfortunes. But equally, I would say something to do is to consider yourself in any business as your own brand in that business, your persona, how you speak, how you carry yourself, how you show up every single day in the business is your own calling card, and that is your branding within the business that will take you forward. And you will find yourself, you probably are at tables already and you don't even realize. And that is, I think, where I will leave it there. That's definitely something to hone in on.
You muted yourself, Mark.
I got through the whole thing without any
So
technical
close.
glitch. So close. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Well, because there's my dog is barking because there's someone doing something in my lawn. Thank you, you three, so much. And thank you, everyone out there who's joined us for this conversation. I hope it was useful. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you happen to be, and enjoy the rest of Pando Horizons. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.